There's a certain silence that follows betrayal. Not the loud kind of heartbreak that wails in agony, but the quiet echo that sits within a soul stunned by disbelief. You didn't see it coming, not from them, not from the ones who laughed with you, ate at your table, shared your secrets, and once swore they'd defend you. You never thought your kindness would be mocked, your sincerity discarded like a worthless coin. You were only being you, genuine, loyal, forgiving, and yet, somehow, your goodness became the punchline of their pride. They bragged, didn't they, about their triumphs, their talents, their influence. With every victory they flaunted, there was a sneer behind it. A quiet jab, subtle perhaps, but calculated. You're too soft, they'd say, too naive. As though being compassionate was a curse, as if grace made you a fool. But let me ask you this. When did being good become something to be laughed at? When did purity start offending the impure? You see, the world is quick to applaud those who are loud, brash, and cunning. It's eager to elevate the bold, even if their boldness is empty. But what it does not know, what it fails to measure, is the sacred weight of a kind heart. And what it certainly forgets is that God sees all. He sees what is hidden beneath polished words and golden facades. He listens not just to the voice that boasts, but to the voice that trembles in prayer. And what of those who belittled you? They thought you'd always remain the background character in their story, the loyal friend, the silent supporter, the easily forgotten. But they underestimated one thing. Heaven watches those the world ignores. Heaven remembers those the world discards. And there comes a moment, a divine appointed moment, when God says, enough. It's a terrifying thing, truly, to build your pride on the bones of another's humility. When they laughed at your tears, it wasn't just cruelty, it was a declaration of their own blindness. They couldn't see the depth of your soul, nor the sacredness of your patience. They mocked the very thing that God cherished in you. And that is dangerous ground to stand on, because the Lord does not forget the broken-hearted. He does not turn away from those who are crushed in spirit. When they belittled your goodness, they were not just offending you, they were challenging the very values heaven holds dear. And you can rest assured that does not go unnoticed. There will come a day, a moment perhaps as ordinary as any other, when the very thing they boasted about becomes the reason for their downfall. The titles they used to belittle you, stripped. The wealth they used to mock your simplicity, lost. The confidence they wore like armor, shattered. Not because you wished it, but because God cannot be mocked. For whatever a man sows, that he shall also reap. And you will rise, slowly maybe, quietly, but undeniably. Your goodness will not be forgotten in the annals of heaven. Your patience, your mercy, your resilience, these are not weak qualities. They are sacred. They are strength disguised in gentleness. And they are written into your story for a reason. What you must understand is this: their fall is not your revenge, it's your release. It is heaven's way of proving that character outlasts charm, that truth outshines deception, and that what is of God will always outlive what is built on pride. Their bragging built a pedestal, yes, but it was hollow. And now, as it crumbles, do not look back, do not gloat, simply walk on, clothed in the quiet dignity of one who trusted God when there was no applause for it. Perhaps they thought they could outrun accountability, that as long as they were admired by others, they could silence the truth of what they did to you. But life has a peculiar way of circling back, sometimes slowly, sometimes with the force of a storm. God, in His mercy, waits. He allows time, chances, whispers of correction. But if repentance never comes, reckoning does. And in that reckoning, you will not need to speak a word. You won't need to explain the pain they caused or how deeply they wounded you. Life will speak for you. The very same platforms they use to elevate themselves will turn into mirrors they cannot avoid, mirrors that reveal their arrogance, their cruelty, their betrayal. And perhaps, just perhaps, in that hour, they will finally understand the depth of what they lost when they chose to belittle what was pure. Do not mistake God's patience for forgetfulness. He is not slow in keeping His promises, but rather He is rich in mercy, not wanting any to perish. But when that mercy is mocked, when kindness is trampled under the feet of the proud, His justice is awakened. And justice, true divine justice, is not loud. It does not arrive with trumpets. It arrives in silence, in the natural unraveling of pride. One thread at a time, until all that was built without foundation falls to dust. They may have said you were too kind, too forgiving, too soft, but tell me, since when has kindness been weakness? Is it weakness to love deeply, even when unloved in return? Is it weakness to choose peace over retaliation, prayer over revenge, silence over slander? No, that is not weakness. That is divine strength. They thought they were winning while you were weeping, but God saw the truth, and He never loses track of those who are mistreated for doing good. In fact, those are the very people He lifts, quietly, steadily, and publicly. And so, let them fall. Let them fall, not by your hands, but by their own weight. Let their pride collapse under the weight of its own emptiness. And when it does, may you stand, not with vengeance, but with the quiet knowing that goodness was never a burden. It was always your power. There is something profoundly sacred in being misunderstood for the right reasons. You see, the world often exalts those who shout the loudest, perform the boldest, and carry themselves with an air of superiority. It does not pause to notice the quiet strength of those who serve, love, and endure in silence. But God does. He notices. He counts every time you chose love when anger was easier, grace when bitterness was justified, and truth when silence would have saved your image. The ones who wounded you saw your restraint and mistook it for weakness. They believed your silence gave them power. In truth, it only gave them room to expose who they truly were. It gave God room to work. Because vengeance belongs not to the hands of the broken, but to the hands of the righteous judge. And He is patient. Oh, how patient He is. Sometimes you wondered if He even noticed, if He even cared. The world moved on. They moved on, while you were left to pick up the shattered pieces of your dignity, your hope, your name. But what you didn't see is that heaven never turned away. There was a courtroom in the unseen realm, and the case of your suffering was never dismissed. It was simply being prepared for divine timing. They boasted of things they never truly owned: titles, beauty, charm, influence. But all of it was borrowed breath, and when borrowed things are paraded as if earned, the clock starts ticking. God will not allow arrogance to thrive forever, especially not when it walks over the back of someone He has chosen. They mocked your purity as if it were outdated. They made jokes about your boundaries, called you too sensitive, too righteous, too different. But in truth, it was your difference that disturbed their darkness. Your light was inconvenient. It exposed their shadows. And so they tried to dim you, not by force, but by shame. They wanted you to doubt your own goodness, but you didn't. You wept, yes. You questioned. You wrestled. But deep within, you refused to become like them, and that is what saved you. That is what preserved the oil in your lamp when theirs began to run dry. The fire that burns in the hearts of the pure cannot be extinguished by gossip, betrayal, or mockery. It is not lit by man, and therefore cannot be put out by man. So when the time comes, and it will, you will see the very stage they built to mock you become the ground where their pride meets its knees. It will not be because you cursed them. It will not be because you schemed. It will be because justice, divine and unshakable, never forgets the cry of the innocent. And what will you do then? When you hear of their fall, when you see the mighty brought low, the proud exposed, the strong shaken, what will you do? You will remember who you are, and you will remember who your God is. You will not celebrate their fall. You will not throw stones, because you know the pain of being wounded, and you know the power of being preserved. Your reward is not their loss. Your reward is the peace that comes from knowing God fought for you when you had no strength to fight for yourself. They tried to define you by your pain, by your past, by your patience, but God redefined you in the fire. He let you walk through the betrayal, not to punish you, but to purify you, to show you that the gold inside you cannot be tarnished by the rust of others' pride. He let them throw their stones, not so you would be buried by them, but so he could use those same stones to build your throne. And as they fall, you will rise, not because you climbed over them, but because you were lifted by unseen hands. The ones they dismissed, God now exalts. The ones they called weak, God now strengthens. The ones they left behind, God brings forward. Let this truth settle in your bones. No one can steal what God has preserved for you. No betrayal can cancel your anointing. No ridicule can erase your purpose. The spotlight of man may come and go, but the light of God on your life is eternal. They bragged about success gained at the cost of integrity. You walked the long road, honest, alone, unseen. But the long road builds something the short path never can. It builds unshakable character. And in the end, character is what sustains what God gives. Not appearance, not applause, not manipulation. So while they fall from platforms they climbed with pride, you will stand on foundations built with patience, humility, and divine guidance. Your rise won't look like theirs, and that's the point. It will be slower, deeper, quieter, but it will be sure, and it will last. When people ask how you made it through, you'll tell them it wasn't strategy or charm. It was God. It was trusting when it hurt, forgiving when it bled, worshipping when there was no reason to sing. It was the unseen decisions, the private tears, the whispered prayers. That's what lifted you. Because what they forgot, and what you must never forget, is that God is not impressed by public image. He sees what's behind the curtain. And when he finds a heart that stayed true, even under pressure, even under attack, he marks that heart for elevation. So let them fall, let them learn, let God be God. There's a truth few will ever speak aloud. When someone mocks the goodness in you, they're not attacking weakness. They're revealing the poverty of their own soul. You became a mirror not because you sought to expose them, but simply by being yourself. Your integrity unsettled them. Your honesty made their schemes feel small. Your refusal to bend into bitterness made their pettiness feel exposed. So they did what many do when they feel threatened by light. They mocked it. And isn't it strange how quickly people forget the times you stood with them? how suddenly your kindness becomes inconvenient. They rewrite the story to make themselves the hero and you the fool, not because it's true, but because it protects their ego. But the truth doesn't stay buried. It has a life of its own. It rises, slowly and steadily, like morning light creeping under a locked door. You can delay it, but you cannot stop it. And God, in His wisdom, allows it. He allows you to be underestimated, misjudged, dismissed. Because it is in those very moments that He is writing the most powerful chapters of your life. He is allowing the soil to press hard against the seed, not to destroy it, but to birth something greater. And when the time comes for you to rise, it won't be through revenge. It won't be because you fought for recognition. It will be because heaven declared it so. Those who belittled your goodness thought they were strong because they had power. But power is not strength. Real strength is shown in restraint, in choosing truth over popularity, in standing alone when everyone else bows. They paraded their success with boastful lips, but you carried your values quietly, not as a shield, but as a covenant. And that covenant is why you are still standing. Don't you see? You were never foolish for being good. You were faithful. And faithfulness, though rarely rewarded in the moment, is always honored in the long run. You didn't lose anything by staying kind. You gained something they will one day crave. Peace. The peace of knowing you didn't betray yourself to survive. The peace of walking upright, even when others stooped low. Let them call you soft. Let them call you strange. The names they gave you are only proof that they never saw your worth, but God did, and He is not finished writing your vindication. They thought the height of their bragging was the peak of their safety, that if they shouted loud enough, laughed hard enough, performed well enough, they could erase what they did. But here is what they failed to remember. You don't rise by standing on someone else's back. You fall. Maybe not right away, but the fall is inevitable. It's slow, quiet, sometimes invisible at first, but it's coming. And while they fall, something beautiful happens in you. You stop needing closure from those who can't give it. You stop explaining your heart to those committed to misunderstanding it. You begin to realize that your story was never about them. Their betrayal was only a chapter, not the conclusion. Their mockery was only noise, not the melody. The real story was how you kept your soul intact while others sold theirs. And now you walk with a kind of holy dignity, a quiet power, not because you won, but because you didn't lose yourself. That is the kind of victory that cannot be undone. There will be people who come to you one day, whispering apologies laced with confusion. "I didn't know," they'll say. "I didn't realize." And you will see it, the sorrow, the cracks in their pride, the realization of what they threw away. But by then, you will no longer be waiting for their recognition. You will have already moved on, not out of bitterness, but out of wholeness. Because that's what happens when God restores a soul. He doesn't just lift you, He heals you. He doesn't just vindicate you, He transforms you. So you no longer need to convince anyone of your worth. You carry it, you walk in it, you breathe it. And the very people who once mocked you will have to watch you thrive in the grace they tried to strip away. This is how heaven works. It doesn't rush to punish. It gives time. Time for change, for repentance, for reflection. But when none comes, justice does. And it is not revenge. It is revelation, a divine unveiling of what was always true. And so they fall. Not because you wanted them to, but because pride always collapses under its own weight. Their fall is not your celebration. It is God's redirection. He is turning the page, writing new lines. And the story He's telling through your life will not end in tragedy. It will end in testimony. So do not regret the way you loved. Do not regret the way you gave, forgave, waited and hoped. Those things were not wasted. They were seeds. And now the season is shifting. What they bragged about will wither. What you suffered through will blossom. And what they thought was your end will become your beginning. There is a subtle cruelty in arrogance that often disguises itself as charm. It dresses up in confidence, it performs in front of crowds, it speaks with conviction. But beneath all that polish lies something hollow. Arrogance feeds on applause and belittles what it cannot control. And when your quiet goodness stood in contrast to their loud pride, it threatened everything they had built. You didn't need to raise your voice to prove your strength. You didn't need to dominate rooms or win debates. You just stayed kind. You just remained loyal. You were consistent in a world that constantly changes masks. And because of that, they saw you as less exciting, less clever, less powerful. But what they didn't understand, what they still may not understand, is that God places extraordinary weight behind those who are faithful in the unseen. While they were building images, you were building character. While they were collecting admiration, you were collecting wounds that would later bloom into wisdom. While they were intoxicated by their own importance, you were learning how to walk humbly. And that humility is what heaven crowns. There will come a day when the very things they once mocked will become the qualities they long for. The world is full of people climbing ladders built on self-interest. But ladders not planted in the soil of truth eventually tip. And when they do, the higher one has climbed, the harder the fall. God has a way of protecting His children, not always by preventing the hurt, but by using it. He doesn't always silence the critics or stop the betrayal. Instead, He allows the fire so that it burns away what was false, leaving you with only what is eternal. And what remains is something no mocking word or arrogant heart can take from you. You are not here to avenge yourself. You are not here to repay evil with evil. Your assignment is far more powerful than that. You are not chosen to compete with those who tore you down. You are chosen to rise in a way that makes no sense to those who did, because when God lifts someone, it defies logic. It confounds the proud and silences the boastful. There will be people who return, not out of love, but because their own platforms crumbled. People who once mocked your path will ask you how you remained unshaken. They will look for the secret they thought you never had. But your strength was never a secret. It was never hidden. It was simply overlooked because it didn't come wrapped in arrogance or noise. And now, as they face the consequences of what they glorified, you will face the rewards of what you endured. It is a strange reversal. The loud become silent, and the silent become unshakable. But understand this, your rise is not revenge, it's restoration. It's the evidence that God does not forget the faithful. He does not overlook those who choose compassion in a cruel world. He does not ignore the hearts that break in silence while others laugh. Heaven records everything, not with bitterness, but with perfect justice. And justice isn't always dramatic. Sometimes it is quiet. It is the slow unraveling of lies, the gentle collapse of arrogance, the return of consequences long delayed. And in the middle of it, you will be untouched, not because you are lucky, but because you are obedient, because you stayed on the path even when that path led through shadows. Let them fall. Let them face the truth they worked so hard to avoid, because the truth always finds its way through. It finds the cracks in the mask. It whispers through the applause. It lingers in the silence after the performance ends, and when it comes, no amount of pride can stand against it. And you will no longer need to prove anything. Your life will speak for itself. The goodness they mocked will shine. The softness they called weak will become your shield. The loyalty they betrayed will become your strength. You don't need to explain, you just need to keep walking. There's a reason the stone the builders rejected becomes the cornerstone. There's a reason God hides his treasures in the humble, not the haughty. There's a reason you were pushed aside, because what God is building through you could never be built in the spotlight of man's praise. So now, while they scramble to hold together what is crumbling, you will be standing on the quiet ground of truth. And the beauty is this: you don't have to celebrate their collapse. You simply have to continue with grace, with peace, with the kind of strength they'll never understand. Because in the end, it was never about proving them wrong. It was about proving that goodness still wins, even if it has to bleed first. One of the most painful revelations in life is realizing that those you defended were quietly sharpening knives behind your back. You remember the moments you stood for them, even when you didn't have to. You excused their flaws, covered their weaknesses, and extended grace when you could have rightfully walked away. And for what? To be mocked, to be belittled, to be treated as though your goodness was a stain on their glory. But here's the thing: they never had true glory. What they possessed was a facade, a shadow version of success. Real glory cannot be built on the foundation of scorn. Real success is never birthed from betrayal. God sees deeper than surface triumphs. He weighs hearts, not headlines. He watches how people treat those they don't think they need. And in that hidden space, where you wept quietly, where you doubted your worth because of their ridicule, God was doing his most important work in you. He was stripping away the approval of man so that you'd never confuse applause with anointing again. He was removing false foundations so your soul would be anchored not in how people see you, but in how he sees you. They bragged about their status, their reach, their influence. They made you feel small for not playing the same games. But in that very place of humility, you discovered something they missed entirely: the immeasurable value of peace. Peace with your conscience. Peace with your God. Peace with a heart not stained by the corruption of ego. They may have convinced others of their power, but they could never convince heaven. And there comes a moment when heaven speaks, not in thunder, but in correction, not in wrath, but in reversal. It begins subtly. Their favor begins to falter. Their words, once magnetic, lose their weight. Their circle tightens. Their dreams, once unstoppable, stall. It's not always dramatic, but it's undeniable. The very things they boasted about begin to slip through their fingers like sand. And it's not a punishment from you. It's not even a result of your prayers. It's simply a law. What is built on arrogance eventually collapses under its own deception. Meanwhile, what you've built, slowly, carefully, prayerfully, begins to blossom. Not in flashes of grandeur, but in roots that cannot be shaken. You start to realize that everything they mocked was actually your covering. Your gentleness preserved you. Your silence protected you. Your refusal to retaliate became your shield. You never had to scream to be heard by heaven. Every tear, every aching sigh, every moment you chose mercy over malice. God recorded it. He didn't just comfort you in the silence. He documented your faithfulness as testimony. And now, that testimony is unfolding, page by page, layer by layer, elevation not as reward for revenge, but as confirmation of endurance. They will see it, and it will humble them in ways that public downfall never could. Because it's one thing to fall by accident. It's another to fall after mocking someone who was standing in truth the entire time. That kind of fall stings. It awakens, it confronts. But your eyes will be set forward, because vindication is not your obsession, it is your inheritance. God does not raise the humble for performance. He raises them because they can carry what others abuse. He doesn't place crowns on those who trample others to feel tall. He places crowns on those who knelt in prayer when everyone else was clapping for the proud. So don't ask why they fell. Don't wonder when their bragging turned into breaking. Simply trust that heaven keeps time better than you ever could. Trust that your heart, though wounded, was never wasted. Trust that your goodness, which they so easily belittled, was always your greatest weapon. The world may forget how you endured, but God never will. Character is not built in applause. It is not forged in the spotlight, nor sustained by followers, nor measured by how many admire your name. Character is built in private pain, in quiet sacrifice, in moments no one else sees except God. And while they celebrated their ascent, while they flaunted every success as proof of superiority, you were in the fire, but not being destroyed. You were being refined. You didn't retaliate when you could have. You didn't expose them when you had the facts. You didn't gloat when their names started slipping from conversations. And that restraint, that quiet self-control, that is the evidence of unshakable character. And it's what will carry you higher than any false success ever could. Because what they bragged about was never truly theirs. It was a house of cards, held up by charm, connections, deceit. But charm without integrity is short-lived. Connections without sincerity are fragile, and deceit, no matter how clever, always turns inward. It eats away from within. That is why they are crumbling, not because you wished it, not because you asked for it, but because what is not rooted in truth cannot remain. And while their pedestal collapsed, you were being planted, deep, hidden, forgotten by man, but cradled by God. The kind of foundation that doesn't move in storms, the kind that holds when everything else shifts. And now, because you were faithful in the silence, God is lifting you in His time. Not rushed, not loud, but sure and lasting. They called you too much, too emotional, too trusting, too honest. But all that too much they belittled is exactly what made you different, what made you chosen. They thought your kindness made you weak, but it made you indestructible. They thought your mercy made you vulnerable, but it built a fortress of grace around your life. They thought you were fragile, but your ability to love again after betrayal made you unstoppable. You never had to step on anyone to rise. You never had to manipulate, lie, or play roles. You remained consistent. And it is consistency that sustains elevation. God doesn't promote noise, He promotes substance. And you have substance, not just knowledge, but wisdom, not just faith, but endurance, not just words, but integrity. That's why you're still standing. Let others chase the wind. Let them build towers in their name. You've chosen something better, a life God can trust, and that is a calling few are willing to carry, because to be trusted by God means you must go through what others run from. You must be misunderstood, rejected, overlooked, and still love, still serve, still remain. Your character was tested through every betrayal, and with every test you passed, not by perfection but by faith, and heaven took note, not of the pain but of your response to it, not of the tears but of the heart that kept beating with compassion through them. You don't know how many angels were assigned to you while you were in that dark season. You don't know how many demonic schemes were shattered simply because you refused to hate. Every time you were mocked and stayed silent, every time you were pushed and didn't retaliate, every time you prayed instead of poisoned the well, you built spiritual wealth. And now, when their tower falls, it will fall with noise, but your rise, it will come with peace. It will feel quiet to the world, but it will thunder in the spirit, because it will be a declaration that goodness still matters, that purity is still power, that humility is not weakness, it is strength wrapped in grace. You never became like them, that is your victory. You never gave up your soul just to survive, that is your legacy. You never compromised your values just to fit in, that is your crown. And as God elevates you, some will try to return, with apologies or justifications or silence. You owe them no explanations, not because of pride, but because your path is now protected. It's not built on proving anything. It's built on becoming who you were always meant to be. Someone who endured betrayal without becoming bitter, who saw injustice and still chose integrity. This is what they couldn't understand, that your goodness was not naivety. It was covenant. It was the echo of God's heart in yours. It was the evidence that you belonged to something, someone, greater than this world. And now they will watch, not your revenge, not your rebellion, but your restoration. The tables are turning. The ones who once laughed will fall silent, not because you crushed them, but because God vindicated you without a single word needing to be spoken. And when they ask how you survived, how you rose, how you found strength to keep going, you'll smile. Not because you've won over them, but because you've won within. That is the reward of true character. It cannot be stolen, faked, or replicated. It shines even in the dark. It speaks even in silence. And it rises even when buried beneath mockery. So walk tall, not in arrogance, but in the quiet, unstoppable strength of someone who stayed good when the world gave them every reason not to. That is the kind of soul God blesses. That is the kind of spirit the world cannot break. That is the kind of character that survives every fall. Because it was never built to impress. It was built to last. And it will.